Have you ever wondered why some memories from your childhood glow in your mind like embers that never went out? Why certain moments, certain feelings, certain unexplainable sensations still follow you, almost as if they belong to someone older, someone wiser, someone who lived behind your eyes long before you understood anything about the world? If you look closely, you'll notice something peculiar about your early years, something you couldn't articulate then but can finally recognize now. That you were not asleep the way others were. You were not drifting through childhood in the soft blur that most people dissolve into. You were witnessing something. You were sensing something. You were listening to a frequency that no one around you seemed equipped to hear. And maybe because no one else noticed it, you learned to hide it. You learned to dim it. You learned to pretend you were just like the others. But deep down, you knew you weren't. Because while the other children accepted reality as if it came packaged and pre-approved, you were quietly feeling the edges of it, pressing your fingers against the seams, searching for the doorway you were sure existed somewhere behind the curtain of ordinary life. You weren't just a kid. You were a watcher, a questioner, a listener, a small human with an ancient awareness humming in your chest. And if you look back honestly, you'll see the signs were always there. Strange, subtle signals scattered throughout your childhood, pointing to something your mind was too young to understand, but your spirit already knew. These signs weren't random. They weren't accidents. They were markers. They were proof that you were already waking up long before you had the language to describe what awakening even meant. Maybe your sensitivity made you feel defective. Maybe your loneliness made you feel broken. Maybe your curiosity made adults uncomfortable. Maybe your honesty made people tell you to quiet down. But none of these were flaws. None of these were malfunctions. They were the early ripples of a consciousness that refused to stay trapped inside the tiny box the world assigns to every child. You weren't strange. You were early. You were ahead of schedule. Were operating on spiritual time while everyone around you was still tied to the calendar on the wall. Think back. Really think. Do you remember feeling things long before you knew what they were? Do you remember sensing the unspoken tensions in a room before the adults realized they were arguing? Do you remember crying at things that didn't bother anyone else? Or questioning things that everyone else took for granted? Do you remember retreating into your inner world not because you were scared of the outside world, but because there was something inside you that felt infinitely more real, more ancient, more expansive? These weren't coincidences. These weren't mood swings. These were indicators, glimmers, cracks in the shell of ordinary perception, little openings through which something larger tried to speak to you. You see, most people don't remember their childhoods, not truly. They remember events, but they don't remember awareness. They remember the facts, not the soul. They remember the birthdays, the schoolyards, the punishments, the games, but they forget the deeper thing. They forget the quiet moments when they sensed that reality was bigger than the adults admitted. They forget the nights they stared at the ceiling and felt the mystery of existence pressing against them like a silent companion. They forget the sudden waves of emotion they couldn't explain. They forget the feeling of being an outsider in a world that insisted it made sense. But you didn't forget. Something in you couldn't forget. Something in you refused to let those early experiences die in the forgotten archives of childhood. Because you weren't just playing with toys. You were observing the architecture of reality. You weren't just asking why the sky was blue. You were asking why anything existed at all. You weren't just upset by cruelty. You were shaken by the cosmic wrongness of it. And now that you've finally admitted to yourself that something inside you has been trembling, overflowing, and asking to be seen, the real work begins. Not the work of fixing yourself, not the work of suppressing anything, but the work of understanding why your sensitivity has become so sharp that even the smallest emotional touch feels like a wound. Because when your inner world becomes louder than the outer one, it isn't a flaw. It's the point where life is forcing you to stop pretending. It's the moment where the surface cracks open and everything you buried begins to speak without your permission. What you are experiencing is not collapse, it is exposure. The exposure of layers you never had time to explore, truths you never had the courage to face, and memories you kept sealed because you thought strength meant silence. You are only now discovering that silence can become a prison, and the walls eventually press inward. The intensity you feel is the pressure of the truth trying to come out. And this moment, although painful, is the first honest conversation you've had with yourself in years. You might be wondering why the emotions feel heavier now than they ever did before, why the loneliness seems to echo louder, why your desire for connection has turned into a burning ache you can't extinguish. It's because you've stopped distracting yourself. You've stopped running. You've stopped numbing. And when the noise of the world fades, the noise within rises, not to torment you, but to guide you. You are not losing control. You are losing the ability to lie to yourself, and that is sacred. The reason this stage feels overwhelming is because your old identity, the one who held everything together, who pretended to be fine, who carried the weight because no one else would, is dissolving. That version of you was built for survival, not for truth. And now the truth is demanding space. Your emotional system is evolving quicker than your relationships, your environment, and even your identity. It's like waking up one morning with a new set of eyes and realizing that everything you accepted as normal was only normal for the person you used to be. You may even feel guilt for wanting more depth, more connection, more honesty. But this desire is not greed, it is evolution. The soul always pulls you toward what will liberate you, even when it hurts. And there is something else happening beneath the surface. Something most people never recognize. Your sensitivity is sharpening because you are moving closer to who you truly are. Sensitivity is not weakness, it is clarity. When you feel deeply, you perceive deeply. And when you perceive deeply, the illusions of life can no longer fool you. You start to see the emotional patterns of people around you. You sense the truth beneath their words. You notice the wounds they carry without having to be told. Your awareness becomes a kind of X-ray vision, revealing everything you used to overlook. This awareness can feel like a burden at first because you suddenly understand more than you want to. You see intentions, insecurities, defenses, and emotional dynamics that others are completely unconscious of. But this is not meant to overwhelm you. It is meant to awaken you. You are being trained to navigate the world with depth, not with numbness. This stage is also where loneliness becomes its sharpest. Not because you are alone, but because you have outgrown the kinds of connections that once kept you company. You feel disconnected from people who still live in emotional sleep. You feel unseen by those who cannot meet you in depth, and you feel misunderstood by those who mistake your sensitivity for instability. But this loneliness is not a punishment. It is a purification. It is removing the false connections so you can build real ones. It is clearing the space inside you so that something meaningful can enter. You are not meant to stay alone. You are meant to be prepared. And while all this is unfolding, something even more subtle is happening. Your old emotional wounds are resurfacing, not because you are regressing, but because you finally have the awareness to heal them. The pain that comes back is the pain that is ready to leave. You might suddenly remember things you haven't thought about in years. You might feel emotions that seem out of proportion to the moment. This is your inner world reorganizing itself. The past is trying to free itself from your body. And here is the truth most people never hear. Healing is not calm. Healing is disruption. Healing is emotional chaos rearranging itself into clarity. Healing is the storm before the integration. If you feel like everything inside you is breaking, it's because the parts that were never truly yours are falling away. Your desire for connection, your hunger for meaning, your sensitivity, your intensity, none of it is a sign of weakness. It is a sign that you are waking up to who you were always meant to be. You are no longer drifting unconsciously through your life.
Becoming present in your own existence, and presence magnifies everything. The beauty, the pain, the longing, the truth.
The path from here will not require perfection. It will require honesty. It will require the courage to feel without shutting down, to want without shame, and to move forward without pretending to be smaller than you are. You are entering the phase where your emotional world becomes the compass, not the obstacle. And the more you trust what you feel, the more aligned your life will become. You are not too much. You are finally becoming enough for yourself. And as you stand in this raw, unfamiliar space where your emotions have finally become honest, something else begins to unfold. Something quieter, deeper, and far more transformative than anything you've felt so far. You start to notice that the more you allow yourself to feel, the more layers within you begin to unfreeze. The numbness that protected you for years is melting, and in its place, strange clarity is emerging. It's not comfort, not relief, not peace, but clarity. A clarity that cuts through every illusion you once depended on. You begin to realize that the intensity inside you is not happening to you, it is happening for you. Every surge of emotion, every wave of desire, every moment of loneliness is shaping you into someone who can no longer be manipulated by false promises or temporary distractions. You are being carved open, not to expose your weakness, but to reveal your capacity for depth. And this capacity is far more powerful than the calm you used to chase. Because now you see what most people never see. The truth of your inner world was never the enemy. Your resistance to it was. And as that resistance fades, your emotions begin to rearrange themselves into a kind of inner intelligence. You start to notice patterns, connections, meanings. You begin to understand the hidden motivations behind your reactions. You recognize the difference between instinct and fear, between longing and escape, between real desire and emotional compensation. This understanding doesn't make the intensity disappear, but it gives it direction, and direction is the beginning of power. You start to sense that your emotions are not chaotic storms, but messages. Messages from a deeper self you ignored for too long. Every ache, every longing, every uncomfortable truth becomes a map pointing towards something you've avoided, your own authenticity. You can feel it forming, that inner pull, that gravitational shift away from roles and expectations and toward the person you were always meant to be. The more you move in that direction, the more your emotional world aligns with your purpose. But with this shift comes something unexpected, the collapse of your old attachments. The people who only knew the version of you that stayed quiet, stayed obedient, stayed controlled, they no longer recognize you. You're no longer emotionally available for superficiality. You're no longer willing to pretend you don't feel what you feel. You're no longer interested in relationships that demand your silence. And as those connections weaken, a sharp emptiness replaces them. This emptiness feels frightening because it looks like loss, but it is actually freedom. Shedding the emotional weight of everyone who kept you small. In this stage, many people panic and run back to their old selves. They return to comfortable lies, familiar distractions, or numbness because emptiness feels like death. But you are beginning to sense something different. That emptiness is not an absence, it is a space that is finally clean, a space that is waiting to be filled with something real. And this realization marks the moment you stop fearing your inner world and begin exploring it. As you explore, something remarkable happens. You begin to trust your sensitivity. Instead of treating it like a curse, you start to see it as a guide. You notice how your body reacts to truth versus deception. How your intuition sharpens when you stop ignoring it. How your emotions respond with precision when you listen without judgment. The sensitivity you once tried to bury becomes your inner compass, and it is far more accurate than the logic you use to force your life with. With this trust grows a new kind of strength, one that doesn't come from suppressing your feelings, but from integrating them. You realize that emotional intensity doesn't make you fragile. It makes you aware. It gives you access to energies, insights, and perceptions that numb people will never understand. Seeing human behavior with extraordinary clarity, the fears hidden in anger, the longing hidden in arrogance, the wounds hiding behind perfection. This awareness elevates you beyond simple perception. It grants you emotional intelligence that cannot be faked. And as your awareness expands, so does your sense of responsibility. Not responsibility to others, responsibility to yourself. You begin to understand that your inner world is not a burden for someone else to carry, nor a problem for someone else to fix. It is your territory, your landscape, your evolution. You alone can navigate it. You alone can interpret it. And for the first time, you start taking ownership of your emotions instead of being intimidated by them. This ownership rewrites the entire structure of your life. You begin to let go of everything that demands you shrink your feelings. You stop tolerating people who make you apologize for your depth. You walk away from environments where authenticity is treated like a flaw. You reject the idea that emotional control means emotional suppression. And as you release these old constraints, your inner world grows even more powerful. The emotions that once felt like storms now feel like fuel. Intense, yes, but purposeful, and yet the deeper you go, the more confrontational this stage becomes. Because now you must face the core truths beneath all your emotions, the truths you avoided for years, the truths that shaped you without your permission. You begin to see your childhood wounds, your relational patterns, your deepest insecurities with brutal clarity. There is no distortion, no denial, no story to hide behind. Everything becomes visible, and this visibility can feel terrifying. But here is the turning point. You do not collapse. You do not run. You do not numb yourself. You stand in the presence of your truth and allow it to reveal what needs to be healed. This willingness transforms your emotional intensity into emotional maturity. You stop reacting from your wounds and start responding from your awareness. You begin to act instead of defending. You begin to choose instead of compensating. You begin to express instead of suppressing. This transformation doesn't make your emotions lighter, it makes them cleaner. The weight you feel now is not the weight of confusion. It is the weight of truth. And truth always carries gravity. As this inner gravity strengthens, you start to attract different experiences. People who resonate with depth begin to notice you. Conversations shift from small talk to meaning. Interactions feel richer. Your presence changes because your energy changes. You are no longer scattered or emotionally fragmented. You are centered, grounded, anchored in yourself. This inner anchoring makes you magnetic, not because you are trying to be, but because authenticity naturally draws attention. You begin to realize something profound. The version of you that the world rejected was never the problem. The version of you that you rejected was. And now that you are reclaiming yourself, life begins to respond differently. Opportunities that match your inner state appear. People who understand your depth begin entering your life. Situations align with your truth instead of your fear. The external world starts reorganizing around your internal evolution. But this phase also brings a final challenge, the challenge of trust. Not trust in others, but trust in yourself. The question that lingers is simple. Will you rely on your new awareness, or will you fall back into old habits? Will you trust the emotions that guide you, or will you silence them out of fear? Will you allow your sensitivity to lead you, or will you treat it as a liability? Because everything from here depends on your willingness to trust what you feel. Not impulsively, but intuitively. Not reactively, but consciously. You must trust that your emotional world is not a battlefield, but a compass. You must trust that the intensity you carry is not instability but power. You must trust that the depth within you is not too much for the world. It is exactly what the world could never offer you. And as you begin to trust yourself in this way, another realization dawns. You are no longer the person who entered this journey. You have crossed the threshold from emotional survival to emotional awareness, from avoidance to presence, from fragmentation to wholeness. And though the path ahead is uncertain, you no longer fear uncertainty because you finally understand that everything you feel is not an obstacle to your life. It is the very force that will shape it. And this understanding becomes the silent threshold you cross without even realizing it. Because once you recognize that everything you've ever felt is not a mistake but a message, something irreversible begins inside you. Your inner world is no longer a place you fear. It becomes a place you return to again and again, like someone visiting a sacred temple built within their own ribs. You start to feel a strange loyalty to yourself, a devotion that you've never experienced before. Not because you suddenly think you're perfect, but because you finally know you're real. This realness is the foundation of a new life, a life you haven't lived yet. The old patterns try to pull you back, but they feel foreign now. The old identities try to resurrect themselves, but you see through them. The familiar emotional traps still whisper to you, but their voices have lost authority. You're moving differently, responding differently, perceiving differently. Your reactions are no longer instinctive, they're intentional. Your behaviors are no longer inherited, they're chosen. And your emotions are no longer overwhelming you, they're informing you. This evolution is subtle but powerful, and at first, the world doesn't quite know how to respond to it. Some people feel threatened by this new version of you, the version that doesn't apologize for existing. Others feel drawn to you in ways they can't explain. Your presence becomes heavier, not with sadness, but with meaning. You speak less, but everything you say carries weight. You react less, but everything you feel becomes clearer. And slowly, without forcing anything, your inner transformation begins bleeding into your outer life. You stop entertaining conversations that drain you. You stop chasing people who aren't capable of depth. You stop abandoning yourself to preserve relationships. You stop tolerating environments that require you to shrink. You begin showing up differently, and because of that, life begins showing up differently for you. But this shift brings you to the final, most important crossroads, the moment where your past, present, and future quietly collide. It's the moment when you finally ask yourself the one question you've avoided your entire life. What do I truly want? Not what society wants for you, not what your family expects from you, not what fear convinced you to settle for, but what you want in the quietest part of your being. This question doesn't come with immediate answers because the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it unfolds slowly, sometimes it waits for you to grow into the person who can carry it. But by asking the question, you acknowledge something sacred, that your life belongs to you and always has. This ownership marks the beginning of the final transformation. You begin to see how every moment of emotional turmoil, every season of confusion, every collapse of identity was guiding you toward this point, the point where you stop living as a reaction and start living as a creation, where you stop interpreting your sensitivity as a flaw and begin recognizing it as a gift, where you stop running from your depth and start using it to navigate the world. And as you lean into this transformation, something extraordinary happens. Your future stops feeling like a threat and begins feeling like an invitation to rebuild yourself with intention, to redesign your life from the truth you've discovered within, to create a reality that reflects who you are, not who you were forced to be. But before you step into that future, the final lesson reveals itself, the lesson of release. You learn that healing is not about becoming your strongest self, it is about becoming your honest self. You learn that growth is not about adding more to your life. It is about removing everything that blocks your soul. You learn that peace is not found by controlling your emotions. It is found by listening to them. You learn that love is not something given to you. It is something awakened within you. This release doesn't happen dramatically. It happens quietly through choices, through letting go of old stories, through soft acceptance instead of harsh judgment, through understanding instead of resistance, through compassion for the parts of you that once fought to survive in ways you no longer need. And as you release everything that doesn't belong to you, the world inside you becomes lighter. Not empty, but spacious. Spacious enough to contain new meaning, new direction, new purpose. Spacious enough to hold the life you're heading toward. And in this space, one final realization emerges. A realization that hums through every cell of your being. You survived every version of yourself you thought would break you. You survived the fear that told you you'd never be enough. You survived the loneliness that felt endless. You survived the emotional storms you thought would drown you. You survived the identity collapses, the betrayals, the chaos, the uncertainty. You survived the days you couldn't breathe under the weight of your own feelings. And now you see that survival wasn't the reward. Survival was the preparation. Because what comes next is not about survival at all. What comes next is about becoming the person who no longer abandons themselves. Becoming the person who trusts their own depth. Becoming the person who chooses their life instead of tolerating it. Becoming the person who moves with clarity instead of confusion. Becoming the person who understands that sensitivity is not weakness. It is awareness sharpened to its highest form. And with this becoming, something awakens, something ancient, something primal, something unmistakably powerful. A quiet inner authority rises, not from ego, but from alignment. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop waiting for validation to feel worthy. You stop diluting your truth to make others comfortable. That era of your life is over. You step into a new identity, not because you constructed it, but because you uncovered. The person you are now carries a kind of gravity, a presence that comes from living in alignment instead of avoidance, a voice that speaks from inner truth instead of fear, a heart that is capable of depth because it no longer runs from itself, a mind that is clear because it no longer lives in denial, a spirit that is awake because it is no longer disconnected from emotion. And it is here, in this final stage, that the conclusion begins forming, not as an ending, but as a beginning disguised as an ending. You look back and realize that every emotion you tried to escape was carving you into someone stronger. Every collapse of certainty was shaping your consciousness. Every painful transformation was preparing you for a life you haven't lived yet. You were not breaking, you were unfolding, you were not losing yourself. You were shedding the version of you that was too small. Everything you felt, the intensity, the fear, the longing, the struggle, it was all the universe pushing you toward yourself. And now that you are here, present, aware, unfiltered, you understand the truth that changes everything. You were never too much. You were never too emotional. You were never too sensitive. You were never too intense. You were simply feeling what others were too numb to feel. Your depth was never the problem. It was your gift. Your sensitivity was never weakness. It was your compass. Your emotions were never chaos. They were your transformation. Your inner world was never your enemy. It was your awakening. And now, with everything you've lived through, everything you've learned, everything you've become, you finally see what all of this was leading you to. You are not here to live a small life. You are not here to abandon yourself. You are not here to fit into the comfort of others. You are not here to silence your truth. You are here to expand, to awaken, to feel, to evolve, to transform, to rise. And now you will, because you are no longer afraid of your depth. You are no longer afraid of your emotions. You are no longer afraid of who you were or who you are becoming. Your transformation is not behind you. Your transformation is happening now. And the life waiting ahead of you, the one built on truth, awareness, strength, clarity, and presence, is the life you were born to live. This is not the end of your story. This is the moment you finally begin living it.